In Underhanded, the new novel by Jim Billman, Sonny Kristoff shares his adventures during the changing times after World War II with a refreshing inside-out look at history. Written from the perspective of men's fast-pitch softball, this was the time when baseball's little brother became America's most popular team sport. But unlike baseball, its imperfect dimensions brought about its demise. Order Underhanded on Amazon. Underhanded by longtime Southeast Iowa native Jim Billman. Available now.
Good morning. I'm Brent Adams here with your Rural Strong Morning Ag Report for this Friday, March 1st. Coming to you this morning from Houston, Texas, where in a little while we'll kick off day number 3 of Commodity Classic. Leading off headlines this morning, 2024 began with farm prices running below year-earlier levels. More on that from USDA Radio's Gary Crawford.
Not the best way to start a new year, but USDA reports the index of prices received by farmers during January was almost 1.5% below December, 10% below January of a year ago. The indexes for both crops and livestock were below year-ago levels, but the news in the USDA report not all bad. The index of prices farmers had to pay for goods and services down almost 2% from January of 2023. A quick look at a few commodities now. Corn losing 6 cents in January, down to an average $4.74 a bushel. That's down $1.89 from January of 2023. Wheat prices holding their ground in January at $6.79, but that's still $2 below a year ago. Soybeans dropping 30 cents in January, down to an average $12.80 a bushel, $1.70 less than a year ago. For livestock producers, prices were below year-ago levels for just about all products except beef cattle, no surprise there, and broilers. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Well, 3 countries are running almost neck and neck to be the biggest buyer of U.S. agricultural products. Here again is Gary Crawford.
Even though USDA has lowered its 2024 forecast for China's purchases of U.S. ag products, lowered it by almost $1 billion.
We still project that China is going to be the top export market for us in 2024.
USDA's chief economist Seth Meyer says right now China is expected to buy $28.7 billion worth of U.S. ag products, which would make it our best customer.
But boy, Mexico and Canada, much closer to home, are right in there at about the same level.
He expects Mexico to boost its purchases of U.S. ag products to a record high $28.4 billion.
So Mexico being number 2, very close to China, and very close to Mexico being Canada,
with projected purchases of $28 billion. So of the projected $170.5 billion of U.S. exports to all nations, China, Mexico, and Canada account for 49% of it. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
And in news you probably didn't want to hear this, Senate ag leaders dug in further on farm bill differences at a USDA oversight hearing with Secretary Tom Vilsack this week. Vilsack hinted at the deep policy differences dividing Senate ag lawmakers when he quoted USDA's founder, President Abraham Lincoln.
The House divided against itself cannot stand.
And with the Lincoln quote made the unspoken point, stubborn partisan differences could force another one-year extension of the 2018 Farm Bill. Politico quoted retiring ag chair Debbie Stabenow at a recent White House event that she'd sooner stick with the 2018 bill than leave a legacy of climate and SNAP cuts. And at the latest hearing,
the bipartisan evaluation of SNAP that we directed in the 2018 Farm Bill, after 50 years of the program, resulted in just an additional $1.40 per day per person, bringing benefits to about $6 a day to help folks put food on the table. But this was enough to lift 1 million children out of poverty.
Citing a record $80 billion drop in net farm income since 2022. Vilsack claimed net cash income hit a record the last 3 years with falling joblessness and rural poverty, and argued new revenue streams, not just a new farm bill, are needed.
What I've heard from our nation's farmers and ranchers is that they're very concerned. Specifically, they're challenged by persistently high and historic inflation, stubbornly high interest rates, burdensome regulations, record large trade deficits in agriculture, and most importantly of all, rapidly declining commodity prices and farm incomes that will make these next 5 years some of the most challenging in their lives.
The National Pork Producers Council commended the USDA's Food Safety and Inspection Service for extending the new swine inspection system line speed trials through January 15, 2025. Processing facilities will enroll in a modified time-limited trial, which includes a study to evaluate the impact of increased line speeds on worker safety. We appreciate USDA and FSIS for listening to the pork industry and taking another step forward toward making increased line speeds permanent, says National Pork Producers Council President Scott Hayes. These actions give pork producers more certainty in an uncertain time. The National Pork Producers Council has advocated for increased line speeds since 2019, and in 2021, FSIS permitted increased line speeds at 6 pork packing plants, while also gathering data to evaluate potential worker impacts. Industry economists say producers could have incurred an additional loss of almost $10 a head early this year without the increase in line speeds and resulting decrease in processing capacity. And finally, this morning, farm tires are a major investment. And while at Commodity Classic on Thursday, I was able to spend some time with Austin Fisher, a field engineer with Firestone Ag. We talked about what to consider when buying tires and how to take care of them once you've purchased them. And Austin, welcome into the program.
Hey, thanks. Glad to be here.
So, as we mentioned, a huge investment here, a lot of options out there. Help us out here. Where do we start?
Yeah, the first thing you need to know is what is the load on the tires that those tires are going to see, the maximum load. So if it's a tractor they use to plant with, how much weight is that planter adding to the tractor? You need to select a tire that has enough load capacity for that weight.
Right.
So that's the first thing, know your load. The second thing is to identify what's important to you and your farm. If you're doing a lot of road work, if you're maybe getting into the fields when they're a little wetter, because you got a lot of acres to go through, maybe an R1W with a little bit deeper tread would be good for you. If your farm's more contiguous, if you do less road wear, if you have sandier soils or you're typically waiting out the fields to dry a little more, then maybe an R1 tire is better for you with a little shallower tread depth. The third thing is to identify, how important is compaction reduction or spending less time in the field. We have IF and VIA products that allow more load at the same inflation pressure or the same load at a lower inflation pressure, and all that's about expanding the footprint, maximizing how much area you're distributing the weight over. So that's for increased traction, improved fuel economy, reduced compaction.
And then once we have purchased the tires, we put them into play here. Let's talk a bit about what we need to do to maintain those tires, because just status quo may tear them up, and it's again a major purchase here. How do we preserve the life of these tires? I know you guys have a 7-step checklist that you like to share with customers.
Yeah, so the first thing, we talked about identifying the loads earlier. So with those loads, you need a certain inflation pressure in the tires. So identifying and maintaining that inflation pressure. Right. So that's the first step. The second step is to do a survey of the sidewall. It doesn't have to be anything extensive. Just check for any cracks, cuts, any bubbles, anything that might appear to be a problem with the tire. Then move to the tread. Do a check of the tread subsurface in between the lugs. Make sure that there aren't any cuts or stubble damage that exposes the cords, or that's more than about a 1/4 inch. Then move to the lugs. Make sure the lugs are in good shape. They're not chunking out or tearing off. From there, you can check the contact surface of the ground. If the shoulders at the center of the tire are lifted off the ground, then maybe you need to relook at your inflation pressure because that tire might be overinflated. But again, you need to, if the planter or whatever piece of equipment is off the machine though, that still might be the right pressure. So that's where knowing that max load will come in. Next, check the status of the valve stem. Is it corroded? Is it rusted through? How does that look? If you have calcium chloride in the tires, of course, we all know what that can do. And then lastly, check to make sure that all the bolts and nuts are properly torqued.
And along the way, if folks have questions, how can they connect with their Firestone Ag dealer?
Yeah, so we have on our website a dealer locator, so you can type in your location there, and it will pop up with the local certified Firestone Ag dealers that'd be more than happy to help. We also have a hotline on our website that you can, the numbers on our website you can call into. and talk to one of 3 field engineers.
Excellent. Well, I tell you what, make sure you go check them out. And Austin, we want to thank you so much for taking the time to join us here and invite you to come back anytime to share the latest with Firestone Ag.
All right, sounds great.
Well, you can keep up with the latest in the world of agriculture by subscribing to the Tractors and Troubadours podcast from Rural Strong Media. Each week, we bring you agriculture industry newsmakers, hot button industry issues, educational features, and the best in traditional country music. The Tractors and Troubadours podcast can be found at ruralstrongmedia.com or wherever you get your podcasts. We also invite you to join us daily on Rural Strong Radio, our 24/7 streaming radio station, found at ruralstrongmedia.com or the Live 365 streaming radio app for your mobile device. Each day, we bring you our award-winning agriculture programming, as well as the best in traditional country music, mixed in with a little bluegrass, western swing, southern rock, and inspirational music. Again, the place to find Rural Strong Radio is ruralstrongmedia.com or the Live 365 streaming radio app. We're portable, so take us with you everywhere you go while you're working on the farm or ranch. Let's get through the workday together. I'll be back again on Monday with another Rural Strong Morning Ag Report here on Steve Shetler Media. Make it a great weekend, everybody.